All right, so in this lecture, we're going to look at the breadth of the anti-communist crusade around the nation. It's not just something that's happening in the government, it's something that's happening all over the country. So there are government initiatives on the national level, but there's also some on the state level. So in addition to the committee hearings and everything by the House Un-American Activities Committee and others, you also have state committees that are modeled after that national one. Police departments create red squads to go out and find communist subversives. Laws are passed to ban or monitor communist presence, with governments keeping files on citizens, most of whom had no connection to communism whatsoever. Loyalty oaths were required of state employees, like school teachers, for example. You're also going to get initiatives from private organizations, people who will take it upon themselves to police the actions of their neighbors. Ideological cleansing in public libraries and universities will take place as un-American books are removed. Things like Robin Hood, who robbed from the rich to give to the poor. It's a very communist attitude. Universities would avoid controversial speakers, expel students, or fire faculty who had suspicious connections. We're also going to see the acquiescence of the judiciary. On the Supreme Court level, in Dennis versus United States, the Justice Department will prosecute 11 top leaders of the American Communist Party under the Smith Act of 1940, which outlawed any conspiracy advocating the overthrow of the government, and the Supreme Court will uphold the constitutionality of that law. And generally speaking, we're going to see the acquiescence of liberals. Afraid of having the finger pointed at them, many will be silent in their opposition to this nationwide repression of free speech, free expression, freedom of association, and other enshrined beliefs like that, leading to what many will refer to as a silent generation, referring to the academics and people like that of the 1950s who, out of fear, refused to publish or write or speak anything that might be considered even the least bit subversive. Anti-communism will also be a popular mass movement. It will grow in strength among particularly those of Eastern European descent, whose home countries are now part of the Soviet bloc. It will also be particularly strong among Catholics who resented and feared communist hostility to religion. Anti-communism will also be a political tool. The FBI will use the anti-communist crusade to expand their power in the federal government. Many will use it for political self-preservation, naming names to take the finger away from yourself. There will also be an attempt to discredit other political leaders as well as many other social targets. Anyone who dared to challenge the status quo were a target for this. So anyone favoring economic regulation, organized labor was a target. Businesses often using the anti-communist crusade to target labor unions. Civil rights leaders would be targeted, with white supremacists using it against civil rights leaders, like, for example, W.E.B. Du Bois, who at 83 is accused of communist sympathies. Feminist leaders, homosexuals, anyone who is considered to be challenging the current status quo will get leveled charges of communist. Republican use of anti-communism will also be a key point in blocking Truman's Fair Deal programs, identifying them as socialist and therefore opposed to freedom. We'll also see the use of anti-communist sentiment to pass acts that are perhaps questionable in nature. The McCarran Internal Security Act will be passed over Truman's veto and require organizations deemed communist by the Attorney General to register with the Department of Justice. It also authorized the arrest and detention during a national emergency of any person as to whom there is reason to believe might engage in acts of espionage or sabotage. This is essentially a kind of reiteration of the Japanese internment policy, but broadened to include every American who could be deemed to fall into this category. The McCarran-Walter Act also passed over Truman's veto, renewed immigration quotas, and authorized deportation of immigrants identified as communists, even if they had already become citizens, essentially nullifying the validity of naturalized citizenship. You also get in 1954 the passage of Operation Wetback, an initiative employed by the military to invade Mexican-American neighborhoods, round up so-called illegal aliens, whether they were illegal or not, and deport them en masse. We're also going to see the confinement of social welfare benefits to unionized workers, with unions in major industries securing health insurance plans, cost of living wage increases, paid vacations, and pension plans only to their members. Western European nations will provide these benefits, however, to all citizens. The Cold War and organized labor will have something of a tense relationship. The CIO, that is the Congress of Industrial Organizations, will expel left-wing leaders and unions and generally support Cold War foreign policy. The civil rights movement will also be affected by the anti-communist crusade, with outspoken opposition from leaders like W.E.B. Du Bois, but most leaders felt that they had no choice but to go along with the Cold War mentality. And we're going to see a shifting approach for mainstream groups like the NAACP. Initially, there will be resistance, but ultimately, these organizations will start to accommodate the anti-communist crusade with purges of communist members, silence about political persecution, with Du Bois indicted for failure to register as a Soviet agent. However, this was in fact dismissed by a judge just for the absurdity of it. But very few people, when faced with these injustices, protested against them. The use of Cold War rhetoric will also be used, however, to promote civil rights. Since racial inequality damaged American image abroad, it was playing into the Russians' hands. And so they would use that momentum to try and win the battle for civil rights at home. We will, however, see the demise of more left-leaning organizations like the Southern Conference for Human Welfare, and a bit of a lull in the momentum for civil rights, although only temporarily. The Cold War generally has a kind of dampening effect. The Cold War will ultimately diminish the efforts of Truman's administration in favor of civil rights, and it has a mixed legacy for post-war prospects. With the economic boom, the rise of the affluent society, highlighting the contrast between the new opportunities and widespread prosperity enjoyed by white citizens and the continued discrimination and poverty suffered by black citizens, we would soon see a civil rights revolution and yet another redefinition of American freedom.